Well, welcome to the last Sunday in March. Welcome to everyone in Northeast India and other places, I guess, around the globe. We, in 2021, we worked our way through the book of James, and we concluded that on our last session together. So now we will turn our attention to the little letter of 1 John. And I like this bookshelf that helps us to see how our Bible is put together, at least our English versions. So in the Old Testament, we have the books of the law, sometimes called the Pentateuch. Then we have 12 books of history, and then what we call poetry, and then the major prophets and the minor prophets. And as we get to the New Testament, we have the 4 Gospels. We only have 1 book of history. Then we have the letters of Paul, and then what we call the general epistles or letters. And that's where we find our little book of James, which we went through last year, and also the book of 1 John, which we are going to go through in the next few months. And then the New Testament finishes out with the book of Revelation, which is, we call it a book of prophecy. A lot of figurative language is found in that book. So if you are going to follow along over the course of the next few months, you are welcome to read the little letter of 1 John. It's not very long. You can read it fairly quickly, and maybe reading it a few times would be beneficial as we come to our study of this book. So what I have in mind for us as we go through the little letter of 1 John is to think about some important things that can be kind of foundational for us. I've called them foundation stones. These are things that we can stand on very firmly in our faith as we make our way through life and on toward eternity with God. So these are kind of solid places, solid ground that we can stand on in our faith. And I think we can learn several of those from our reading of the book of 1 John. But before we get there, I want us to spend a little bit of time in introduction and background, because I think that will be helpful to us as we go through the book of 1 John. I think it will help us to have a better understanding of some of the things that John is going to say in the epistle. So tonight's lesson will be a little bit more of introduction and background. We will look at the first few verses of 1 John, but this will be the only lesson that we look at introduction and background, so we'll take a few minutes to do that. So first of all, it's generally accepted and understood that the Apostle John was the one who wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. He also wrote the Gospel of John, and he also wrote the book of Revelation, which means that he has actually written 5 different books in our New Testament. And it's fairly common belief that he was writing to Christians, perhaps new believers, in the Roman province of Asia, sometimes called Asia Minor, and likely in the area around Ephesus. So you can see Ephesus here on the map. And so most of this area, there were a lot of churches that were started by the Apostle Paul. And so it seems like John is writing to many of those people in this letter of 1 John. I'm going to give you a bigger map so that you can look at it more carefully. I want to point out several things from the map because I think it will help us to appreciate what John is doing and what John is saying. So here's kind of a map of what we call Asia or Asia Minor in those days. And so if you look, most of Jesus' life took place, his time on earth was on the eastern coast of the Sea of Mediterranean, along the Jordan River, between Judea and Galilee. But then you remember the Apostle Paul, who started out as Saul of Tarsus over here, and he became a follower of Jesus. And he had several missionary journeys that started here in Antioch of Syria. He either crossed the water or went around it and went off into Asia to places like Lystra and Derbe and Iconium, Antioch of Pisidia, and then down to Colossae. There was a church established in Colossae and a book in our New Testament called Colossians. And then he went on up to Ephesus, spent a lot of time in Ephesus. And then he went on up the coast. And this is where he had the Macedonian call to come over to Greece and help us. And so he did that. Also, you notice on this map the city of Miletus, because on Paul's last journey, as he's heading back to Jerusalem down here, where he will be arrested and eventually sent back to Rome as a prisoner on a ship. And you remember reading in the latter part of the book of Acts about his journey to Rome. Another thing I wanted to point out to you from this map is that because John not only wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, but he also wrote the book of Revelation. And if you've read the book of Revelation, you know that the first 3 chapters are devoted to messages from Jesus to the 7 churches of Asia. I think almost all of those churches, the cities are listed here: Pergamum, Sardis, Smyrna, Ephesus, Philadelphia, and Laodicea. I think the only city that's not on this map is the city of Thyatira. So John again writes Revelation, and it is directed to churches in this area here. Also, you might remember from reading in the book of Acts chapter 2, when the Holy Spirit came upon the apostles, and they list a number of places that people had come to for the day of Pentecost. And it says they came from places like Cappadocia and Pontus and Phrygia and Pamphylia. So there's many people, and Asia, so many people. This was a very significant part of the work of the early church after Jesus returned to heaven. And so our little epistle of 1st John is mostly directed at people who are trying to follow Jesus and lived in some of these cities and towns in this area. So one other thing I want to point out to you from this map is I want you to notice the city of Hierapolis and Laodicea and Colossae. So I've already said that Paul wrote a letter to the church in Colossae, which we call Colossians. In that letter, he mentions the church in Hierapolis. And what I want you to pay a special attention to, Hierapolis was about 16 kilometers from Laodicea. And in Hierapolis, there was a natural, what we would call a hot spring, where the water came out of the ground at almost boiling temperature. And then it ran down a little stream to Laodicea and then on down to Colossae. By the time it got to Colossae, the water was almost cold. But when it ran through the city of Laodicea, because it's so hot, when it left Hierapolis, the water was still lukewarm when it went through the city of Laodicea. Now, that might mean something to you as you remember some of the instructions John gave in the book of Revelation. So, Revelation chapter 3, John writes, he receives this vision from Jesus. To the angel of the church in Laodicea write, these are the words of the Amen, the faithful and true witness, the ruler of God's creation. I know your deeds, that you are neither cold nor hot. I wish you were either one or the other. So because you are lukewarm, neither hot nor cold, I'm about to spit you out of my mouth. So think about what those words must have sounded like to the people living in Laodicea at the time, knowing that there was a stream running through their city with water that was lukewarm. So this was a very vivid illustration, I think, for the people in Laodicea at the time. So my son, Mike, was able to make a trip to this area of the world a few years ago. And here are some pictures that he took while he was there. So this is the city of Hierapolis. There is still this hot spring that bubbles out of the ground with water that is pretty much boiling temperature. The steam rises off of the water, and people go there believing that there's some kind of medicinal value in being in the water where it's not quite so hot. And so today they have tried to harness some of that water, and they have run it through pipes to different places. The picture in the bottom left-hand corner is actually looking from this hot water, and you're looking off across the valley toward the city of Laodicea, which was 16 kilometers away. And then the bottom right-hand corner, you're looking at this from the side of Laodicea, and you're looking at the hot springs up here in the background, which was in Hierapolis. So that the country is still there. Most of the cities are gone. Here is the city of Laodicea, which they've done a lot of archaeological excavation. And one of the things that they found here on the side of the hill is the remnants of an amphitheater where people would come and listen to great speakers and orators, and they might have other events there. But most of that is not doesn't exist anymore today. But this hot spring still exists, and it still runs. So get us back to the map, and I think that's an interesting thing as you remember these three cities here. So kind of fix some of these things in your mind, because I'm going to show you a map of modern day, in our modern day era of this same area. So just think about the land where Jesus lived and walked, and the Mediterranean Sea, and the Black Sea up here on the top, and Paul's missionary journeys through here all the way into Greece and down to Athens and Corinth and so on. So we move to our next map, and this isn't topographical like the other one was, but it does show you the geography today. So all of this land is in the country of Turkey today. But you can still see where Paul would have traveled. That hasn't changed. He would have left Antioch here, over to Tarsus, and then Lystra and Derbe and Iconium and all those places. Colossae and Ephesus would be over here on this coast, and then he journeyed up and on into Macedonia. So this is today's map of the area. And one of the things I wanted to point out to you, most of you are likely aware that just over a month ago, Russian troops invaded Ukraine. I think this is just the little peninsula at the bottom of Ukraine that is called Crimea. Russia actually took that over in 2014. But when Russia invaded Ukraine about a month ago, NATO, that's the North American Treaty Organization that many of the countries in Western Europe are part of, including the country of Turkey. So when Russia invaded Ukraine about a month ago, NATO asked Turkey to block any Russian warships from the Mediterranean from coming up and going through their country and into the Black Sea, where they could be used to launch missiles against Ukraine. So I think it's very interesting that this part of the world has been very significant for so many centuries, and this is kind of what it looks like today. So we've been praying for the people of Ukraine because we have people in our congregation who have relatives in Ukraine. There are several churches of Christ in Ukraine. Very difficult to get much information from most of those because of the war. But we have been praying for the people there, that the conflict will soon be over. There's been a lot of loss of life and property and suffering. So we've been praying that that will end very, very soon. Okay, so back to our map from before. There's one other thing I wanted to show you. So John, the Apostle John, is the writer of the Gospel of John, 1st and 2nd, 3rd John, and the book of Revelation. And so John, Ephesus is actually up here at the top of the map, is almost gone. You can still see Miletus here. But John was eventually arrested because of his faith in Jesus. And he was sent as a prisoner to the island of Patmos, which was like a prison island. It's kind of like we would talk about Alcatraz off the coast of California. It was a prison island where they sent prisoners. There's really no place to go, no place to escape. So John was on the island of Patmos when he received the visions from Jesus that he wrote down and became our book of Revelation. And those messages were sent to the people living in the area that we've just been talking about, people living in Asia Minor. So Revelation chapter 1, verse 9, John says that he was on the Isle of Patmos when he received this vision from Jesus. So I hope that helps you with some geography and remembering how relevant that is even today, although countries have changed and cities have changed, but it's still a very important part of our world today.